Templars operated a fleet of ships and their own trade route for goods and passengers between the West and the East. They owned land, including farms, mills, and vineyards.
The Knights Templar was the first Western multinational corporation, and they certainly were the first banking group in the West.
It is these transactions that the Templars are best known for, offering the modern-day equivalent of travelers' checks, safety deposit boxes, letters of credit, and large cash loans.
They became bankers in a very, very big way. They lent to emperors, priests, bishops, kings. They would lend money to anybody who needed it. There was a church law against charging interest, so they didn't charge interest, they charged rent. It was a neat little euphemism to get round it. The name of the game was profit.
The Knights Templar originated in 1119 with just 9 noblemen. By the time they'd reached the pinnacle of their power in 1300, they numbered in the tens of thousands. There were Templar warriors in the east and a massive support system of civilian Templars in the west. Together, they constituted an empire unrivaled in medieval Europe, with riches beyond imagination and power without limit. Their rise had been meteoric. It began in 1128, just a decade after their founding, when the first Knights Templar returned to the West after 9 years in Jerusalem. But from 1150 on, the Knights Templar no longer guarded the road to Jerusalem. They had found a better way to protect travelers along the route, an ingenious system that allowed pilgrims to travel without the cash and valuables that marked them out as targets.
Before anyone would leave for crusade, whether it was a pilgrim or a noble or a king, they often would leave their land deeds, their charters, their jewels, their family heirlooms, precious items and objects in the Templar commandery closest to them. So they would go there, deposit their goods, and in exchange for that they would receive a note written in cipher.
Every time you had to pay for something en route, you went to the local Templar commandery who would pay the money for you, recode your chit, and you carried on. And when you came home, you brought your final chit back and you either got a bill or the change. It was the charge card, American Express writ large.
If they were robbed or if it was found by an outsider, someone, it would be of very little value.
But the only way you could get the money out would be to crack the code. And the Templars, obviously, given their reputation for secrecy, were very good at keeping their own codes out of enemy hands.
The services offered by the Templars became the model for today's banking system. Money transfers, credit and checking, safety deposit boxes, pension plans, and wills. But their most controversial service was providing loans.
They became bankers in a very, very big way. They lent to emperors, priests, bishops, kings. There was a church law against charging interest, so they didn't charge interest, they charged rent. It was a neat little euphemism to get round it.
Despite its strict laws against usury, the church looked the other way. This was the first of many concessions made to the Templars. In 1139, Pope Innocent II, a former protégé of Bernard, the Templars' patron, issued a papal bull which bestowed unprecedented privileges on the Knights Templar.
The Templars got an extraordinary package of perks from the Catholic Church. They were allowed to cross borders, which was a big deal back then. They were absolved from taxes. They were under no one's authority except the Pope himself, which was really an exceptional arrangement for the time.
All of their estates in Europe essentially were businesses that helped support the eastern end of things. So you see the Templars in Europe running farms, vineyards, tile factories, anything that can make money, they were in there.
It has been suggested that probably about 5% were even in places where battles were being fought. So a very small percentage were knights fighting Muslims. The vast majority of Knights Templars were part of the infrastructure that kept those knights fighting.
Even in France, where the prosecution was most vigorous, many Templars escaped the mass arrests.
Very few Templars relatively were captured or imprisoned. Most escaped. In France, which is where the majority of the high-ranking Templars were located, only about 620 of 3,000 were captured.
But where did they go? And did they take the Templar treasure with them?
The most likely explanation is that slowly but surely they drifted away through eastern France up into the mountains.
In the 14th century, this mountainous region was sparsely populated with small communities of farmers and shepherds.
Many of the trade routes from France went straight through the Alps, through that region, which we now call Switzerland. The Templars knew this region extremely well. They'd been using it for well over 100 years.
If so, Switzerland may have proved the perfect place for the Templars' military skills and their business acumen.
We find people who had been fairly primitive farmers quite quickly turning themselves into seasoned soldiers and forging communities in which banking and proto-engineering were taking place. Really, there can be no coincidence.
After the official suppression in 1312, there were still a number of Knights Templar that were left, that never were tried. There were thousands of them.
An incredibly small percentage of the Knights Templar, both knights and everybody else within the organisation, was captured in 1307, probably not even a tenth.
Most of the Templar arrests were confined to France and England. In other parts of Europe, they fared much better.
Most other countries at first were very reluctant to prosecute.
So it did vary from area to area, depending on the strength of the church.
Those that did try the Templars rarely found them guilty.
One trial I think it was in Bavaria, which was attended by a troop of fully armed Knights Templar, they were found not guilty, not to anybody's great surprise, because the idea was if you find us guilty, we'll kill you.
Of the hundreds, possibly thousands of Templars that remained at large, there is little record. Some retired or joined other orders.
But the only way you could get the money out would be to crack the code. And the Templars, obviously, given their reputation for secrecy, were very good at keeping their own codes.
Secrets waiting to be deciphered by those adept enough to crack the Templar Code.